Hi, so today I'll be talking about macromolecules. And as I've mentioned in the previous lecture about proteins, proteins are one of the four macromolecules. And today I want to introduce you to other three macromolecules. The four macromolecules are protein, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and lipids. You might be familiar with some of the terms here, protein and carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are just sugar that we eat every day, and I've talked about proteins from the last lecture. But first thing first, I want to introduce you what is a macromolecule. A macromolecule is a large molecule that is composed of smaller molecules, and you can think of it as a giant compound made up of smaller parts. Most macromolecules are polymers built from monomers. As you can see from the picture on the right, a monomer is a single circle right here, while a polymer is made up of a lot of these identical little circles. You can think of a monomer as a single piece of M&Ms and a polymer as a bag of M&Ms connecting together. Therefore, a polymer is a long molecule consists of many similar building blocks called monomers. Oops, sorry. And three of the four macromolecules are actually polymers, and they are carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acid. And the point that I want to make here is that a lipid is not a polymer because it is not made up of monomers. Just a quick recap, a quick summary, a monomer is a building block of a polymer. So monomers, they build up polymers and they make polymers. And I'm gonna give a brief, just a brief review about proteins because we talked about it in the last lecture. Proteins are made up of amino acids, which now we know that amino acids are monomers, right? Because they build up proteins and protein is a polymer. And every amino acid has four parts, which are amino group, carboxyl group, hydrogen, and R group. And differences in R groups cause differences in the functions of a protein. And when we connect two amino acids together, they form something called a polypeptide. And these polypeptides are polymers. And the two amino acids are connected together by a peptide bond. A protein may contain one or more than one polypeptide. So in summary, proteins are long chains of amino acids held together by peptide bonds. There are four structures of protein, which are primary structure, secondary structure, tertiary structure, and quaternary structure. Primary structure is just basically a simple sequence of amino acids joining together, and the secondary structure are the coils and folds in the polypeptide chain. The tertiary structure is the 3D shape of a single polypeptide, and it determines the protein's function. And the quaternary structure is when multiple polypeptides join together and the overall protein structure made by these polypeptides. And the thing we need to know that is not all proteins have a quaternary structure because not all proteins have more than one polypeptide. And now we're going to be starting with some new materials, which is the second kind of macromolecules. They are called carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the sugars, starches, and fibers found in fruits, grains, veggies, and milk products. So if you ever eat bread in the morning, potatoes for dinner, these are all carbohydrates and they serve as a fuel for our body. And I personally, I love carbohydrates. I eat a lot of rice every day. And in biological terms, carbohydrates are organic molecules that contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And another term that I want to introduce right here is organic molecules. Organic molecules are not something that's like super hard. It is just a molecule that contains carbon. If something contains carbon, it is an organic molecule. And carbohydrates, they include both sugars and their polymers. So basically we can think of sugars. simple sugars as monomers, and when we connect these, and when we join and connect these simple sugars, they form a polymer, which I'm going to introduce in the next slide. Monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. I'm not sure if you've realized mono and poly, we've been mentioning it over and over in the past. Monomers, polymers. A monosaccharide is a monomer, and it is the simplest sugar that we can find, which is right here. And the two common monosaccharides are glucose and fructose. Once we join the two simple sugars together, the two simple monosaccharides together, we form something called a disaccharide. And some of the the common disaccharides that we see in daily life are when you combine a glucose and a fructose together, it forms something called a sucrose. Sucrose, what is a sucrose? Sucrose are the cane sugar that we eat in daily life. I love sugar. All the sugar contain sucrose. M&Ms, Jolly Rancher, everything like that, they contain sucrose because they're cane sugar. And when you combine a glucose and a galactose together, it forms something called lactose, which we can find in milk. And I'm not sure if you've heard something called lactose intolerant. It's just basically when human bodies cannot digest, when the enzymes cannot break down the lactose in milk. So then people feel sick when they drink a lot of milk. And this is why that lactose intolerant people cannot drink a lot of milk, because there are lactose in milk. And when we combine a glucose with the glucose, we form something called a maltose. Maltose syrups are the best. They taste so good. And the last thing I'm going to introduce is a polysaccharide, and polysaccharides are basically just repeated units of monosaccharides. They are more than one monosaccharides connecting together. And one of the common example is starch. The third type of macromolecules that I'm going to introduce is nucleic acid. Nucleic acid, they're made up of something called a nucleotide. So now we know that nucleotides are monomers. Yeah, here's a quick trick. Whenever something is made up of another thing, the building block is always the monomer, and the thing that is formed out of monomers is the polymer. One nucleotide looks like this, and it is made up of a phosphate group, a sugar, and a nitrogenous base. When a lot of nucleotides combine together, which we can see right here, here's a nucleotide, here's a nucleotide, here is a nucleotide. When they join together, they form something called a nucleic acid. And a nucleic acid contains carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus, which are listed right here. The two kinds of nucleic acids are deoxyribonucleic acid and ribonucleic acid. I know these terms might sound super hard, but once I turn them into DNA and RNA, you might be really familiar with it. And a deoxyribonucleic acid, which is also what we call it as a DNA, it is a very important thing for our human bodies and also for all the other organisms, because it carries genetic information, and this is the reason why that you'll look like your parents. For example, if your parents have blue eyes, you might also have blue eyes. If your parents have blonde hair, you might also have blonde hair. My parents have brown hair, and I have brown hair too, which is not so common for an Asian or a Chinese kid. But yeah. And we say that deoxyribonucleic acid, which is DNA, it is a self-replicating hereditary material which is present in nearly all of the living organisms that we can find in this world. And it is very important because it carries our genetic information through our generations. And once you have a kid, your kid will carry your genetic information, half of it from you and half of it from your partner. And last but not least, the last macromolecule they're called lipids. And lipids, something special about lipids is that they are not a polymer because they're not formed by monomers. And lipids are the one class of large biological molecules that do not form polymers. And the most biologically important lipids are fats, oils, phospholipids, and sterols. And I'm gonna be focusing on fats in this lecture. There are two types of fats that I want you guys to know. The first type is called saturated fats. They are mostly solid at room temperature, and one of the most common example is butter. I eat butter every day. Like, I need to have some butter on my bread, which is a carbohydrate because it is formed by sugars. And unsaturated fats are mostly liquid at room temperature, and one of the common example can be olive oils or all the other kinds of oils. And eating too much saturated fat can be bad for your body because it increases something called a bad cholesterol level. And once this thing is increased, it can cause a higher risk of getting cardiovascular diseases. So we do suggest people eating more unsaturated fats. So if you can eat olive oil, don't eat a lot of butter because it is really hard to digest, and it raises your cholesterol level, which can cause cardiovascular diseases. Thank you for listening to my lecture today. I guess it is a lot of information, and I've combined them to like a shorter lecture. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to email me. And yeah, thank you.